Okay, well, Keenan's all yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Gretchen, and good evening and welcome to everyone. It is 6:05, and I will
I'll fix
bring
these lights.
this, what is
Okay.
our inaugural meeting of our Disability
Well,
Rights
thank you,
Task
Gretchen,
Force for the Human
and
Rights
good evening
Commission
and welcome
to
to
order.
everyone.
It is 6:05,
I hope you'll
and
accept my
I will
apology. I
bring
thought I had that
this,
pushed.
what is
Okay.
our inaugural meeting of our Disability
Well,
Rights
thank
Task
you,
Force for the Human
and
Rights
good evening
Commission
and welcome
to
to
order.
everyone.
It is 6:05.
I hope you'll
And
accept my
I will
apology. I
bring
thought anybody.
this,
Okay, that I apologize. We're
That's all
having
right.
audio and visual difficulties. I'm gonna go fix the lights while Joaquin is sharing.
Well, anyway, as I was saying, thank you all for being here for what is an inaugural conversation about disability and accessibility here in the city of Salem. Uh, the convening body for this conversation and those to come is the City of Salem's Human Rights Commission, which we'll talk about here momentarily. I really just want to begin by thanking you, and why we, yeah, let's begin with an expression of gratitude. Mostly, the nine of you, I think there are eight of us, eight of you here, but the nine of you have volunteered to join a short-term body dedicated to high-level discussions that will result in recommendations to the Human Rights Commission, which again is the convening body of this task force, as well as City Council, with the goal of making Salem more welcoming and accessible and inclusive place for people with disabilities and our great diversity. You collectively, as far as I can best understand, represent various lived experience with disabilities, direct service providers, educators, representatives from 6 of our 8 wards across Salem, nonprofit leaders, planners, and advocates, and at least one Paralympian. I'll let you guess who that is. I'm not gonna out them. But all that to say, again, just a huge thank you in advance for lending your time and your expertise while volunteering to serve your city in this way. Welcome, Jimmy. Thank you to the conversation. Uh, and we'll get into what all that means here momentarily. But again, just a huge thank you, and to thank you, Gretchen, for organizing this meeting and drafting this agenda. So we're going to do introductions. The way we do that at the commission generally is just saying your name, pronouns if you wish, and we often say our ward. I don't know if there's any rhyme or reason to that, but that's what we often do. And your relationship to the commission, or in this case, the task force. So if you're a member of this task force, which all of us, barring Eunice and Gretchen, are, you can say I'm a member of the task force. And Gretchen and Eunice can introduce themselves as they please. They're staff. So, does that feel good? Well, I'll start with myself. My name is Joaquin, and I am the chair of the Human Rights Commission. And for the purposes of this task force, the chair of this short-lived body as well. I live in Ward 8. Gretchen, do you want to
Sure,
introduce yourself?
you bet. Good evening, everybody. My name is Gretchen Bennett, and I'm on the staff team here at the City of Salem. Use she, her pronouns, and that's me.
Everybody, my name is Robert Marshall. I am the vice chair of the Human Rights Commission, and a member of this task force.
Good evening, everybody. I'm a member of the task force. My name is Jimmy Jones. I use he and him. I'm the executive director of the Mid-Willamette Valley Community Action Agency and our statewide president of the Community Action Partnership of Oregon. I'm on the governor's racial justice task force and previously on the House Bill 2100 task force for racial discrepancies and homeless delivery services across the state. And just recently, I chaired the joint task force on hospital discharge in Oregon.
Thank you.
I'm Tony Marys, she, her, and I'm a member of the task force. I'm not sure if my ward, because technically I'm kind of like outside of it. I've been in the
Yeah, that's all right.
out by Broadway, Fred Meyer.
Great.
Haley Barenbaum. I'm a member of the task force, and I'm also not 100% sure what ward I'm in, but I'm in South Salem, about a half mile from the city limit.
I'm Dan Dickinson. I'm again, don't know what ward I'm in. I'm a member of the task force and live over by the fairgrounds, Northeast Salem. I'm just going to represent the neurodiversity side of diversity.
Let's go online. Christina, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Christina Ballard, she, her pronouns. I am a member of the task force and of the Human Rights Commission. I live in Ward 7, and part of what I do outside of that is I'm the administrative coordinator at the Oregon State Hospital Museum of Mental Health.
Carolyn, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Carolyn Breedlove. I'm a special education teacher in the Salem Kaiser School District. I also do not know what ward I am, but I'm excited to be part of this task force.
Welcome. And Eunice, go ahead, please.
I'm Eunice Kim. I'm just an interested staff member in this discussion around disabilities. I'm a long-range planning manager for the city of Salem. Thanks for letting me be here.
Thank you for being here. So our next part of the agenda is I have to ask Gretchen if we receive public comment. Have we, Gretchen?
None received.
All right. And then I will ask you, the people, if there is a motion to approve the agenda as it has been presented. Anyone can make that motion. I'll need a second. Okay.
Second.
All right. Moved by Tony, a motion by, seconded by Haley. All those in favor of the motion, please express their approval by saying aye.
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 All right. Motion passes in the affirmative. Thank you all. Okay. So really the scope of this conversation tonight is one of just getting to know each other, figuring out our hopes and dreams and aspirations of this body, as well as just contextualizing where we are and how we got to this point today. I think I'll begin by just briefly talking about this thing that you've joined, and then we can get into the meat and potatoes of that, as my grandmother would say. That's not fair? All right. So the Human Rights Commission was established in the 1960s. We are a long-standing part of this ecosystem of boards and commissions at the city of Salem. We're also one of the first human rights commissions in Oregon, and one of our longest lasting. Not all commissions have been so fortunate as ours. Examples like Portland come to mind where they were sunsetted recently. And the commission was brought about after MLK came to Portland in 1961, and that began as, you know, it's hard for us to imagine now in the 2020s a tumultuous time like the 60s, but there was a lot of conversations about racial justice, and that conversation included Salem. And there were a lot of folks here locally. I just gave the presentation to Eunice and Jimmy, so forgive me for being a little bit repetitive here, but Willard Marshall, who's a former mayor, asked a committee to convene to talk about human rights issues, not unlike what we're doing today. In those times, it was more around racial justice, and that committee was chaired by someone named Jerry Frank, which may come to mind for some. And about a couple years later, in 65, City Council unanimously adopts an ordinance to establish the Human Rights Commission. And so by joining this task force, you're a part of that legacy. And the work that the commission did in those early days included, enforcing, basically punishing actually businesses for not letting Black folks into their storefronts, as well as, pretty controversial at the time, removing tax status for Salem businesses or nonprofits that had anti-inclusion sentiments in their charter. So that was a major victories in those early days. More recently, things that the commission has championed has included requiring closed captioning in places of public accommodation, as well as graduating housing status as a protected class in the city of Salem, which is a kind of a pioneering effort on the part of Salem as compared to our national peers. So again, welcome to that part, this legacy and tradition of advocating for folks in Salem. And as we'll get to later in our conversation, you are part of a city government, and one that is currently I think, fairly in duress around budget and what is possible or not possible. So I hope to get to that later as well. This body in and of itself was brought about. We had several members of the Human Rights Commission who have in recent months been very passionate about bringing disability to the forefront of our conversations. You know, we spent a lot of time thinking deeply about a select number of issues in the commission, most notably houselessness in the city of Salem, recently citizenship and the role, especially in this era of kind of anti-immigration sentiment. We've been thinking a lot about queer issues for the queer community. We do an annual Trans Day of Remembrance in November, among others. And so it was a big push that was very welcome to think more explicitly and deeply about disability and accessibility, and so recognizing that there are structural issues that have taken many decades to kind of cement themselves, and will take, unfortunately, a lot of labor, a lot of time, and like a lot of resources to undo. And so I think something that I really wanted to highlight was that we have a deeply engaged community, we have incredible and tireless staff, but as I said earlier, we are on the throes of a budgetary austerity with an unpredictable financial future, and all that is made more complicated, as I say, by the chronic nature of inaccessibility and inequity for our communities, and the urgency that those challenges present. So I will say that I do admit feeling the scale and challenges that our city faces, but I'm hopeful that in the short term, we can produce recommendations that will substantively and materially change the lives of folks with disabilities here in Salem. So what does short term mean? Before, in front of you, and for those online, I'm sorry, do you have an online version of this, Gretchen?
I should have thought of that. Let me see if I can access it, and if so, I will share on my screen.
So this is not by any ways a decided thing, but I wanted to bring to this conversation kind of a scaffolding of expectations, so to speak, just around timeline and what was within our scope. And so Gretchen was very good to draft a timeline. Do you have this, Jimmy?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And so, as you can see here, this lays out a timeline that runs from April, which is what we're doing tonight, through December, which allows, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 months, 9 meeting times like this that will run probably an hour and a half. To gather, hopefully on a monthly basis, that's the expectation, that as was communicated to y'all at the outset of this, to talk about these issues. So tonight in April, we have introductions, grounding structures, context setting, discussions of what y'all's interests are. I have a list of those interests. As I mentioned earlier, they're diverse and important. And I see us spending the late spring and summer, May, June, July, August, really diving deeply into issues. We all are experts in different areas and in different ways, but how do we come together in common conversation to think about these issues? So, sharing ideas about what our priorities are, gathering information from the public. So one thing that I'm always wary of is, almost all of us have disabilities, and we experience things and we advocate for things and we're very knowledgeable, but we don't represent the community. We talk about issues through our expertise, but we need to go out into the community and talk to folks as well and get input and gather information. So having some kind of public input process feels important. Presentations from staff. So Eunice is here. Thank you, Eunice, and maybe having Eunice, who's our long-term planner, come and talk to us about planning. We had a comprehensive plan in Salem a couple of years ago that really informs the work that we're doing. We're also doing a lot of updates to those plans the coming years. So what does that mean? Maybe talking to our city attorney or our city attorney's office. Gretchen obviously is an amazing resource. She's our ADA compliance manager for the ADA compliance for the city. And so as early as possible, thinking about the staff, city leadership, community input that we want to hear and gather in the next couple of months. So the May, June, July, August meetings kind of allow for that sort of engagement. And then in September and late summer, early fall, we're starting to think about, okay, we've gathered all this information. We've heard from all these people. We know what is or possible, what's less possible, what's more possible, and in what timeline. How do we refine our recommendations as a task force? What other input can we get from staff around their perspectives around feasibility? And even just because something isn't feasible now doesn't mean there shouldn't be a recommendation. And so figuring all that out as well. And then come November, October, November, December, we're really drafting recommendations. Now, those could live at the city council level, those could live at the Human Rights Commission level, or whatever level we see fit. I'm not wedded to those. So in September, November, we're doing this, and September, October, by November, we're finalizing and approving those recommendations, and then by December, maybe January, we're presenting those recommendations to commission and council. Now that feels tight, and it is. And I want to stress this. The nature of a task force is that it is a transient body. One recommendation may be that we establish a commission that does this work, that we do have a permanent body that does something like this. And who knows what that will look like. But so I know that there's a lot to be done. There's maybe even some anxiety about all that needs to be done. This is a short-term body, and I hope that this allows the time to really intake information and provide robust recommendations and digest information in a way that is meaningful for us and for the communities that we hope to serve. Okay, I have monologued for far too long. Are there any reactions to anything I've shared, the context we've set, why we're here, and anything about this timeline? This timeline is not anything other than a recommendation. So please feel free to ask questions, provide different perspectives, worries that you have coming into this space, hopes that you have for this space. All is fair game.
Could I ask a little bit about the origin of this task force? What were the causal factors? What precipitated it? I don't feel like I have a good understanding.
Yeah, thank you, Jimmy, for the question. The proximal cause was that we have one member in particular, Jeffrey Evans, who actually is on this task force. Unfortunately, he's not here tonight. Hopefully, he will join us. Who joined the commission in the new year, or was it late last year? I guess it was
Late last.
November, December, and was really interested in. And I don't think I'm not misrepresenting him, but to form a disability commission. He wanted that to happen. We wanted it to happen in short order. And our reaction was very open to that idea. I love that idea, but we just don't make recommendations, just willy-nilly. We have to process things. They have to be robust recommendations. What does a disability rights commission mean? What would it do? And so the knee-jerk reaction was, let's establish a task force. Let's establish a body that will look at that. And then the conversation became very quickly, let's establish a task force that examines, to the best of our ability, limited though it may be, this panorama of accessibility in Salem. And because the formation of a commission might be one way to address that, but there must be others. And so how do we just take a more robust approach to this? And there was some pushback about it not being a waste of time, maybe not just from Commissioner Evans, but from the urgency. There's a lot of things going on. People can't get housing. People experiencing houselessness at a rate of 60-70% are disabled. We are not doing the work that needs to be done soon enough, and I recognize that. But I think that my hope is that this process will lead to robust recommendations like the ones that Commissioner Evans and others have been advocating for. So anyone else on the commission is free to add to that. Oh, Christine was raising her hand.
Sorry, I know second to unmute there. Yeah, so I don't want to directly speak for Jeffrey, but I know that one of his big concerns is the built environment and adherence to ADA accessibility standards for a variety of things surrounding the built environment, things like parking and access to buildings, etc. And myself, I want to make sure that accessibility for more invisible disabilities is examined. And both of us, I think, share a concern about making sure that folks with disabilities know that the city is listening and there is an outlet to kind of explore some of the things they might be experiencing. Because some folks may not think the Human Rights Commission is something that's appropriate. Another concern of mine is for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I'm sorry, my cat is in my face. She she doesn't like it when I'm talking to somebody else. And where was I? Oh, intellectual and developmental disabilities don't necessarily have a voice on these types of commissions, and I wanted to make sure that that was addressed as well. So, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Christina.
I would also like to add to that, as someone who has both a physical and a couple of fun and visible disabilities, and who has a service dog, it's fun, I'd say sarcastically, with public access and ADA, only thinking of specifically one disability when it comes to, specifically for me, I can think of bathrooms. The amount of times I can't reach a sink, the soap, because they put it high enough where it's above my head and I can't squeeze around a sink. And they only think of, okay, well, wheelchair leg clearance, but you have to think about even people sitting in wheelchairs might not be able to reach that. So you have to think about the amount of not pressure, the doors. A lot of those, there's pressure gauges you can use, see how much force it takes to open a door. And a lot of doors here, not just in Salem, are pretty heavy, and the grip strength with that have issues with a lot of people, the uneducation of service dogs and people bringing in their ESAs or other things to public access threaten both her and I. We've had many dogs approach us not friendly, people who approach me when I tell them please don't talk to her, and they will go okay, and then we'll bend down and interact with her. That puts me in danger, especially with having PTSD and a panic disorder. Not the most fun. Yeah, a lot of ideas that I need to kind of keep together.
Thank you.
I'll actually add to that. That's actually why I did not bring my service dog today, because if other people do bring theirs, I don't know if their dog is trained enough. And I always question the training of other dogs.
Yeah.
And so that's why I didn't bring her with me today, just because I question if there's going to be other dogs.
Yeah, I have to.
I know my dog's trained well enough, but I can't ever rely on somebody else's dog.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's hard. I've had a person who, I was in a Panera in a different state when I used to live in Colorado, and she had her dog for because she stops breathing when she sleeps. We're in a Panera, and she, as we walked away, shoved her dog into my dog and said, "Say goodbye to the puppy." And so I'm very lucky she has not washed due to people just letting their dogs approach her while we're working on all of that.
Haley, if
My
I'm-
dog has been snapped at in public by other service dogs.
Yeah, I've had that, or they growl. Trader Joe's, there was one where we were entering and they were coming in, and then I had to stop in the middle of the parking lot because it was yapping and trying to get to her as soon as possible.
I was just curious if you wouldn't mind saying what washed.
Wash means no longer able to work.
Copy, thank you.
Yeah, so she loses the ability to have the public access due to reactivity or other things like that.
Well, thank all of you. The reason I asked the question is that I've been on a lot of task force and commissions over the years, and sometimes for good and sometimes for not so good. They take on a life of their own and sort of lose the initial focus. So I just think it's always important to make sure that the original purpose was accomplished and honored as part of the process.
And it's a good question too, Jimmy, because as I was maybe alluding to, especially, the issues that our communities face are so structural in nature and chronic, as I said, also in nature that, and I've served another disability-related, commissions, task force at many levels, and I'll say that I have experienced concept drift as well, where it was because there's so many things, and it's because no one's experience is the same, and there's so many things, and we can. It's easy to lose yourself in all of that. And some of that concept exploration is very good and healthy
Yes.
and needed. But you may find that we don't take a deep dive into things that really matter and are important all the way, all the time. And so I think one thing that we will kind of serially come back to and address is this is the beginning of hopefully a very long conversation that lasts much longer than our time here on this task force or, the work that we do here, but begins many conversations around the city that will last and endure and change people's lives. And so, I really want to just emphasize that these are we're going to touch on planning, on education at the city level. How do we, inform and engage people? What structures we recommend we put in place? Maybe a review commission, committee, an oversight committee, whatever it is that we recommend. But ultimately the work lies beyond this task force because the work needs yet to be done, even at the conclusion of this task force at the end of the year. And we need to stay as comprehensive, in other words, high level as we can be, while also being sensitive to meeting the particular needs of a certain area. So that will be, I'm sure, a tension that we'll experience multiple times, a good tension that we'll experience multiple times in the next 9 months. Any other comments, questions, or reactions?
Well, I wondered if it would help. I was speaking with one member outside the meeting who was revisiting the establishment motion, and maybe just to read it real quick in light of your point, the commission, the motion had been to establish a disability rights task force to review the problem of human rights issues related to the disability community and seek to develop an approach to address those issues. So I think that's consistent with how you talked about it.
Gosh, I'm glad.
So would it be fair for us to maybe declare that our primary purpose is to create a foundation? Like, we don't need to nitpick a lot of details. Maybe we want to approach the biggest issues that maybe are the low hanging fruit for the city to address while it works on a long-term planning. That includes, ultimately one thing that I think is huge is lacking just civically is educational health. That is a huge piece. It's a huge piece. And I don't think that is something that we can tackle. However, if we create a good foundation, part of maybe our directive going forward is to remind them that, all of these things are going to be important to consider, not each issue in a small box and solving that issue, but, how do we address that issue and get some more wins out of that forward momentum?
I mean, that is a nice way of framing it, I think. And also, Tony, you can think of it as, and this is kind of the classic way of thinking of recommendations. You can have short-term recommendations, medium-term, and long-term recommendations. What are things? One thing we can start thinking about at the end of the summer, once we've been hearing a lot of things from staff and leaders and other experts, is to ask ourselves, what can the city accomplish tomorrow? Within our budgetary means, within all the personnel that unfortunately is changing, and all the uncertainty, what can we still do tomorrow? And then what can we do in the next couple of years, given our financial reality? And what can we do in the next 10 years? I think those are all reasonable time frames that we can think about. So I hope that also adds meat to that question. Okay. I think I didn't have a particular agenda item set around for ground rules and norms, but generally the commission expects that our conversation would be collegial and center on decency and respect and dignity, and we hold grace for each other and be generous with each other's concepts, while also recognizing that disagreement and tension is a generative and frequent and oftentimes productive part of public conversations. So we don't always have to agree, and I would hope that we don't, because that would mean that we're getting somewhere. But that when we do disagree, that we are, again, generous with one another. And I think unless people have strongly dissent to that or have other ideas of what group norms should be, I think that is as good as any. I'll pause there if anybody has any reactions to that. What we might do too, just on a note of accessibility, we try to do with the commission is to, especially for folks in the room, when we speak, all it says is city manager's office on the transcript and online. And so, and if we can get into a habit, and not, I mean, this is a best practice, just saying, hey, I'm Joaquin and and say what your piece, or hey, I'm Robert and whatever. Because that really makes it easier for folks who read the transcript or reading our captions online. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to 4C, which is around our goals and interests for the task force. So what I hope to get out of this conversation is, at the close of tonight, we'll have a laundry list of things that are important to us. Maybe we can start talking about prioritizing these things so that we can turn around in May and have someone here to present. And we can start talking about these issues and start, setting timelines and expectations. I've heard education. If Jeffrey were here, he would rightfully say physical access, parking. I shouldn't have to invest tens of thousands. He would say hundreds of thousands of dollars into my home to make it accessible. What is our housing production strategy? Eunice. What are we doing to ensure that when we have accessible housing, which is a provision of our comprehensive plan, that folks with disabilities are getting that housing, instead of just, what do we do there? How do we make sure that public transit and our streets are accessible to folks of all kinds of disabilities, not just mobility disabilities, things of that nature. So, as I said, we are a diverse group, both in the disabilities that we experience, of where we live in Salem, our professional experiences. And I would just invite you to just say things that are important to you, and let's get a list going of things that are, as they say, important to us. Does that sound good to everybody?
Yes, and don't wait for the meeting. I'll be working from home in between,
That's right. And
Bring all your thoughts.
if you have lists or if you have ideas, Tony or anybody, that you wish you had said tonight but walk away not having said, we have multiple months worth of meetings to fill with topics. So please share those with myself and Gretchen, especially at any time. So it's feel comfortable to do that.
Just a question there with we talked kind of scope and so forth. Is there an expectation of communication throughout the month, or are we limited to these 6 hours to be able to solve this?
I'm going to let Gretchen talk about that.
Sure. It's a good question. It might involve clarifying a little bit what you're thinking of. Do you have something in particular in mind, or would you like me to kind of talk generally about that?
Kind of generally, I'm just seeing there's about 7 hours on the agenda total, but a lot to discuss in that time period.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, a couple of grounding truths for us is anytime you are to gather in a group larger than your quorum, which would be 6, it's really important that be available and accessible to the broader community, because this is a public meeting environment. So that's one grounding truth. You can certainly have exploratory conversations with another member or with staff to share thoughts and ideas, but I'd caution against anything that would begin to build towards a recommendation. And so that's a really important grounding argument as well. I think depending on the appetite and interest of the task force and depending on staff capacity, you could schedule additional meetings or additional gathering sessions, or maybe you want to tour an area of concern in the built environment, or schedule a listening session or a town hall with particular communities outside of this of like a monthly meeting cadence. And depending on everyone's appetite and our staff capacity, we can sure do those things. So, and I'm always happy to take calls or get coffee or whatever could help as well. So I don't know if that gives you some.
Oh, it does.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, some sense of it.
I just heard there's like having work offline.
Yeah.
So I did actually already put together my personal story on accessibility within Salem.
Great.
And I'd be welcome to hand out a flyer or a handout to anybody who needs it, or email it to the group as well. Like I said before, I'm focused on the neurodivergent aspect of Salem. I currently run a company where I offer training for businesses when it comes to encountering neurodiverse customers as well as employees. That's kind of my main focus of my company. But within the Salem general area, my personal experience was I have reserved an ADA camping spot for me, myself and my family. I verified with the person over the phone because ADA is only available over the phone. So I verified with the person over the phone that my accommodations would be in place and what I would need. We got to the place, we set up everything according to everything that was discussed. However, the host noticed that we didn't have a handicap placard in our car. And those spots are specifically set up for physical disabilities. And I let him know everything was already confirmed with the person online booking it. I disclosed everything to her. He ended up thinking I had an attitude because of my tone of voice and the way I was responding. So about 10 minutes later, the ranger came by with a trespass notice in his hand. And just so that's kind of my lived experience, one of many, having a service dog and so forth being others. But also places like Portland have several parks designed for eloping children. They are fully fenced parks or fully fenced picnic park areas, or even picnic park areas that are secluded for even if in the event of somebody having PTSD. I personally myself, I'm outspoken, I'm autistic, ADHD, and so I do work with a lot of autistic children and autistic families where a secluded area is important. Then the second aspect of kind of why I'm here, kind of we talked about like the homelessness. 50% of our homeless population have disabilities. Yet we set up hostile architecture around the entire city on a daily basis. And we are limiting access for homeless and non-homeless individuals to access our parks, access our bathrooms, and even have rest areas within public spaces. So that's kind of my approach as well. Seeing that we're spending a lot on hostile architecture to limit accessibility instead of spending that money to improve accessibility.
So Dan, I think you shared so much. Thank you. I had a question about the parks that you mentioned. I don't know a lot about our parks other than they're beautiful and I love going to them. In your experience, are there accessible or inclusive areas in our parks right now generally? Because we have a lot of parks in Salem.
I'm sorry, I was preoccupied. Can you repeat the question?
I was just thanking you for sharing what you did.
I heard that, yeah.
Now my question was around parks. We have a lot of parks in Salem. In your experience, what is the state of accessibility of parks for the reasons that you've just described, or the considerations you've just described?
Going through the parks in my head, the park that is owned by the Salem Hospital is probably the most inclusive park within Salem, but that is by Salem Health.
Yeah.
It is their rehabilitation park that they have. But within Salem itself, I can't even pinpoint a specific park that would have any accessibility for neurodivergent families.
Thank you.
Well, Tony, given the houseless crisis that we have, some of the parks who do have some secluded spaces have been taken over by the unhoused, which further reduces access for disability. So that was something else I wanted to bring up when you brought up about the hostile architecture. Sometimes things that the city has done to further accessibility for one group of people with disability is counter to what is productive for another group. For example, for someone like me who has mobility issues, falling is a constant threat, depending upon where I'm at, wearing with an autoimmune disorder. The little bumps for the people who are blind can be an issue for me. I understand those are important for them, but they're an obstacle for me. So I think that's a huge piece too, is that we're very thoughtful about the kinds of recommendations we make so that we're not causing a different problem when solving this problem.
I could elaborate on what Tony was saying. So within our blind and low vision demographic, we're looking at 2.4% of our demographic is going to benefit from things like that. A recent crosswalk that was put in on Lancaster has the buttons that speak to you, have the sound and audio tones, have the bumps on the sidewalk. They are designed specifically for blind, low vision society. However, only 2.4% of Salem fits that category. But if you look at people with chronic pain or fatigue, you're looking more about 10 to 15%, meaning additional park benches or sitting areas or things like that. So like you said, we do cater a lot to one demographic versus another.
And I think also to your point, Tony, how do we make recommendations that meet the needs, the real needs, even by a very small demographic, while not infringing or curtailing on the needs of others. And I'm a wheelchair user as well, and I can tell you, getting over those bumps can be very hard sometimes. And I have a motor on my chair when I do use it, and it falls on often. And so it's just, I've so many times I've said, I just wish there were a rut for me to get through,
Yeah.
or get my wheels through or something, because I just can't sometimes get through it.
Yeah,
And if I'm
it's an
especially tired,
offset.
exactly.
I've had to help somebody actually flip a several 100-pound motorized chair over because it tipped over from one of those intersections.
So thinking inclusively means thinking of everybody when you're making accommodations. Christina, I see your hand. Can you pass me that, please? Thank you. This is awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. So one of the things I've been thinking about, and it's becoming more clear listening, is that while cities and businesses and other agencies meet a lot of the federal ADA standards in the technicalities, they're not meeting the ADA accessibility standards in spirit. And for example, that's some of those issues that you are talking about right now. And I think some of the complaints that I have heard have been related to that. Different parts of the city, different staff will say, well, we meet the ADA regulations on that. Yeah, well, just because you're meeting the technical specifications, it doesn't mean it's truly accessible. So I think taking a look at that is important. When most of those guidelines and requirements came out at that time, legislators were not thinking about a lot of the invisible disabilities that we do think about now. And I think there was a really good example there about the public camping. If you don't have that tag, people assume that an accessible space isn't meant for you, type of thing. And I think where we'll find the most valuable input about that is by talking to people in the community to see how they interact with the community, and talking to folks who work with people with disabilities. So I think we're going to have to engage in listening sessions and invite a lot of folks from agencies who provide services, and make sure that everybody who may not necessarily understand that they get to have a voice has a voice.
I couldn't agree more, Christina. I also will say one thing that I've often found for folks in the community is we governments like Salem ask them to give input, and then there's no follow-up. And so that only sows distress or lack of confidence. So I think a big part of what our role could be, as well as one of convening, is to be transparent and frank about what's within our scope. Always referring back to our scope, what we hope to do and by when, and what isn't, and so that we can build that trust and not break it. Go ahead.
Tony again. Just a thought. Do we know of a city that has done a really good job in this area? And is there somebody within the city of Salem who has the ability to network and maybe share some lessons learned or anything about what somebody else has already done.
Right, Haley. So okay, I'm gonna out myself. I'm the Paralympian. Because it wraps into this. So growing up, I was very much around very, very wide variety of different physical and invisible disabilities. One of my best friends who I go to MLC Comic Con with every year, who's in the Seattle area, they work for a, not a law firm, but sorry, my brain's a little going off right now. I have a little bit of migraine. They work as people who help with new builds with ADA compliance and everything. They when we were at Emerald City Comic Con, not this year, but last year, we were taking pictures of both them and I showing different issues that the new conference center has. And they were even consultants for the build of the conference center. And they just did not listen. I can always reach out to them and see if they're willing to come down this way. I know that they've had coworkers come down to the Portland area for consults and all of that. So I can always see if they wouldn't mind joining. They're also in my D&D group, so it's really easy to access them.
Yeah, please leverage your D&D connection as much as possible.
Oh,
yeah.
I know, I'm missing D&D today. So,
That's great, thank you. And
Yeah.
if anyone has recommendations or contacts, please feel free to share them with Gretchen and I. That'd be very welcome. Christina.
Yeah, so I think I had a while back sent you an email about the Disability Rights Commission in Madison, Wisconsin. I got to work with them when I lived in Madison for 15 years. I was part of a group that advocated for accessible transportation. So that's that commission has been around for quite some time and might be a model you want to look at. And if interested, I'm sure I could reach out and somebody might be willing to talk to us a bit about their experiences.
Thank you.
all right, I just had another thought, Haley again, about the public outreach. So I'm a part of the LGBTQ community as well. And Pride at the Park was something that I got to finally go to last year.
Yeah.
I had both her, who's under the desk, and my parents with me. And this is actually how I met some of you guys. And I was thinking it'd be great because a lot of people don't think about the disability pride as well as part of being in that, because there's a big community of both the physical and neurodiverse who fall into the LGBTQ plus community. I think that would be a great place where we could set up getting a public access to talking to people about maybe how we can make not just only those events, but other public events. And
This is Joaquin. That is a great idea, Haley. And I will say the commission has a long tradition of doing outreach like the one you just
yeah,
described.
that's where I actually met guys.
Oh yeah, great.
Yeah.
So we do tabling everywhere we can, and we're invited in a lot of places. And sometimes we can't get everywhere we want to, but and so for that community in particular, two things I can think of is the June Pride, which in Salem is not as big as September Pride.
Yeah.
Pride in the Park. So I think both would be great. If that's of interest, we can definitely talk about that. I don't want to speak for the task force, but I'm sure we can.
I can state a kind of similar event here. The Autism Walk here in Salem is I believe it's the 24th of next month.
Great.
Not exactly sure on that date, but it's coming up next month. And we actually got the local sponsors are funding the walk in full this year. So everybody can go for no cost whatsoever. But that's an event that the Oregon Parks and Rec, some members of the city council, as well as a lot of businesses within the community have said that that's one thing that they do want to have bigger in Salem, is kind of that autism walk and that awareness of the neurodivergent disabilities. That's planning to be a several thousand people walk this year.
Great.
But definitely a good place to do that as well.
quick side note, Dan, if you wanted to send me your document as well as that
I can-
walk link, I could share it with the task force.
That was
Oh,
great.
I can send information out.
Thanks, great.
So I wanted to take a moment to ask us to think more about education. We talk about education and outreach. I'd love to hear what folks have in mind there, both of what we could talk about and explore during our time together and what the city's role is in that. So we've heard, so some trends I'm hearing is we're hearing a lot about the built infrastructure, you know, livability, ADA compliance versus universal accessibility. But I know we've touched upon and thought about education. I know a number of you, from looking at them, talked about it in your applications. So I would just open the floor to that conversation in terms of people we want to bring in, hear from, how we want to think about education and outreach as a recommendation.
To me, this is Jimmy, to me, when I think about these issues, I mean, I think the top priority is things that have already been mentioned, addressing the built environment, but there's also some public policy issues around the values of the city of Salem in particular, and a lot of issues that I think in terms of education could be really addressed. We have the homeless issue, and particularly around dignity and access and to services and housing, but also just fair treatment under the laws outlined by the Oregon revised statutes. We have the citizenship issue, broader accessibility, LGBTQ plus, which is really important to me. Racial justice. We have, gentrification conversations going on all throughout the downtown, proposed major projects which might displace low-income individuals or, the homeless community in particular. We've been involved in, on the equity roundtable for the city of Salem for several years, and we've seen presentations there that suggest to me that there's sort of modern redlining practices taking place with the siting and locations of affordable housing projects in town. And I find that deeply disturbing. So, and I don't think anybody really thinks too much about it sometimes. So I would, in terms of education, I think there are just a lot of avenues there for potential exploration.
Thank you, Jimmy. Carolyn.
Hi, this is
Hey.
Carolyn speaking. I'm a special education teacher and also a person with lived experience having emotional behavioral disability. I work in emotional behavioral special education. I'm not sure if this falls within the scope of the committee, but one thing I've noticed throughout my career is the lack of mental health supports for my students in the community, and I know that's a massive hill to tackle, and I'm not sure if that's something we could accomplish, but resources for families, resources for students, and the lack of access, I think, is incredibly important.
Thank you.
Joaquin,
Yes.
to tack on to what she had to say, yes, access to the education. Like, before we even talk about what the scope of education is, like, how do we educate people on the fly? And I think it's, outreach is a good way to inform the community, but it's also about not siloing the information. And, we need to, because disabilities touch all different communities like pride, neurodivergence, all of that. And I think that we need to cross-pollinate that information. And, so every event that the city puts on, the city should have a booth with information available when people are open to receiving it in that kind of an environment.
Booth about whatever,
Just about,
just disabilities generally.
yeah, include disability, but maybe at every event, the city doesn't focus on that one thing that we're celebrating, but also make sure that that information for these other activities that the city is trying to accomplish, that knowledge and information is available to people in the community, because people are interested in what impacts them personally. And so until somebody loves somebody or is somebody with a certain type of difference, it is, we have enough on our plates, right? So, we need to leverage that sense of sharing information when people are open to receiving it as much as possible. We need to use that to our, benefit as much as possible.
Thank you.
Sorry, just a thought as I was looking at the agenda. Would we be able to put also this information in Spanish as well, just because there is we do have a lot of Spanish speakers. I work for a labor union, the majority of our members are Spanish speaking. And so I've been slowly converting a lot of our stuff into both English and Spanish. So that's just a thought, because I found we only literally have one sentence on here that's also in Spanish.
Yes.
And that definitely, I know, because with our membership, they've known, with me kind of blatantly being very obvious that I'm a little different. I've had some of those members come up to me asking about how they can get access because they don't feel comfortable because they don't fully understand the English language or what's going on, or they just have.
Yeah, this is Joaquin. This is an ally point that I really wanted to name this. And I think speaking of first conversations, preliminary conversations, rough drafts that will hopefully become great things, maybe aren't perfect themselves. It is not lost on me that I'm the only person of color on this task force. And so, I just want you to know that I'm aware of that. And I think that, Jimmy's had some names. I've reached out to them. We haven't been able to come to an agreement. But I think, I will continue looking for folks, especially in its early months. And independent of that or outside of that, we should be doing, I think, as part of our work, target outreach to minority language communities, Spanish language communities, Cantonese, Marshallese, Chuukese communities, whatever, to get those perspectives in the most robust ways possible, as well as other communities of color, because it is absent from this conversation. I'm sorry, Haley, go ahead.
Sorry. I can too. So, and I was thinking of Chema and all of that.
Yeah.
Reaching out to maybe some tribal leaders, just because my family is from the Pine Ridge Reds.
Yeah.
And one of the largest and poorest reservations. And I know they struggle with a lot of access. I get a lot of looks when I go and visit family because I'm literally one of the only visible disabled people that they've seen on their reservation.
Yeah.
Besides maybe some others, and they tend to just be home. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also know that communities of color are some of the folks who experience the highest impact of disability, whether through their engagement with the medical system or what have you. And so I think having those perspectives, considering those as much as possible in our work is of high importance to me. And so I didn't want to have this first meeting go without that being mentioned, because it's important for all of us to be cognizant of.
I was going to kind of circle to the kind of original thing we were talking about with the access of education. We have, like, through Medicaid, there is access through some education, some counseling, some so forth through there. But not all people with disabilities would qualify for those type of services. And those type of services are very selective. When it comes to being present at events, educating the public. Right now, a lot of that stuff is volunteer-based, and the city and the public is asking professionals and people who have gone through the education to volunteer their time to do that, especially when it comes to informing other businesses or just the public in general. So I would kind of like to explore some, I've actually spoken to other cities that have, or personally I work with somebody in the UK where they have a grant program set up where businesses can apply for the grant and hire a disability consultant to come into the business and assess their business. Rather than just relying on the ADA, it's grant funding that they can hire a local representative with a local disabilities business to be able to do that assessment. And that's just one way of having those funds recirculated into the public while the public being more informed.
Thank you, Dan. So we talked about built infrastructure, parks, educate and outreach, community engagement. A lot about.
That's just a clarification on the term. I keep hearing the term built infrastructure. Is that it is what it is? Or can you define what built infrastructure means?
Who used it first?
I think
Was that me?
Built
or-
I think
infrastructure.
Christina,
I think
Christina's got their hand
Okay.
up.
Yeah, the built environment is referring to how, the physical infrastructure, uh how people gain access to things and how the ADA has uh the rules and regulations regarding the built environment, things like roads and parking and buildings and that type of access. And the things that people with uh, physical limitations run into within that environment. Uh, things like cutouts in sidewalks or accessible parking spaces or ramps to get into buildings, proper door handles, things like that. And so that's the built environment. And I also kind of wanted to piggyback off something somebody was saying. Um, I think we might want to ask some business leaders in town to come in and talk. For example, I know like the movie theaters, they have sensory friendly days, right? But when you look at events that the city has or uh, other larger venue events that are being held that the public can go to, there often is not a sensory friendly space within that environment. For example, if you were to go to like say um, an event at the convention center, there's no separate room where folks who have sensory issues can go sit and maybe enjoy being there. Um, that type of thing. And that kind of goes above and beyond what the ADA has called for. Thanks.
I kind of highlight what Christina said. I actually run several sensory areas. I've done one at the state fair as well as the recent one at the fairgrounds at the Comic Art Expo. We did set up a sensory area. And a little bit on that, Autism Society of Oregon does set up sensory rooms and sensory booths when called upon. As a nonprofit, that's part of what they do. Is they set up sensory rooms when needed. And I agree, even the airport has a sensory room now, so that people can visit the sensory room if needed. And that's something very needed to have a permanent area within those big public buildings.
Sorry, I'd like to also agree with that as someone with the fun and sort of PTSD and the neurodiversity that gets thrown in with all of it. Yeah, it's hard sometimes when she alerts and I have to go find a space. A lot of the time I'm looking for a space in a public area and then I still have people come over trying to help, but causing more of the sensory issues and all of that.
I usually find myself in a single gender bathroom or a wheelchair accessible stall.
I find myself like hide into corners because luckily I'm small enough to just go hide in a corner, but I have to sit on the ground a lot for that, and there's not a lot of places where I can feel safe being on the ground. And unfortunately, she's not the biggest of dogs, so we get stepped on a lot in those situations or walked almost on. So,
yeah. Well, thank you all very much. I feel like we've got maybe a half a dozen big topics, which is good and what we were hoping for. And I just want to thank you all for your vulnerability and your forthrightness. Is that a term that we use? Speaking, so candidly about what is important to you all. And so I'm confident that what you've shared and what you will come to share will make for great conversation and engagement and hopefully robust recommendations. So we will take this information, Gretchen and I, and maybe pitch timelines, start filling in these calendar meetings with topics and presentations and people. Please engage with those and give us feedback, recommend names. Haley, you mentioned some, Christina mentioned some. Continue doing that so that we can make this as efficacious as it can be for you as we digest these big topics. I'm going to go ahead and move us forward with the permission of the task force and talk about getting our schedule down. So again, recognizing that we can have, if it's the wish of the task force, meetings outside of the schedule, specific special meetings, public forums, outreach, tablings, etc. So barring those caveats, we would hope to have monthly meetings that last an hour and a half. And I think the question on the table is, question, if I'm reading the agenda right, is first Mondays or Wednesdays of each month. Tonight, in other words, as an example. Or I guess tonight's not the first Monday, but a Monday like this work for folks moving forward.
Monday's preferred.
Monday is preferred for me. I
Mondays.
can make Wednesday work, but Monday would be easier.
I can make Monday work.
I don't want to take it from
No,
you,
you're good.
Andy.
You're all good.
Okay,
A lot of the times, one of us ends up, we're a group of neurodiverse
yeah.
people, so sometimes there's only,
And it's only once a month.
no, they're well aware. They've been warned not.
Christina and Carolyn, how are Mondays? Getting a thumbs up from Christina. I'll pick you. Thumbs up from Carolyn for you. And just 6 o'clock, is that reasonable for folks? Okay. I'm looking at Jimmy too, but Jimmy is busy. I mean,
Thursday's
not
really
that
only
busy.
the bad day at me.
Okay.
So Thursday's just.
Well, let's do that then, the first Mondays of the month. I look forward to spending those first Mondays with you for a while yet. Typically, we have our last period available for member remarks. If anybody wants to share something on top of mind for them or on their heart about something that we talked about or we didn't talk about, that if you feel needs to be mentioned tonight at this public meeting, please feel free to do that now. And if not, I thank you again for your time. This was a great first conversation. I look forward to seeing you at the first Monday of May at 6 o'clock, and have a good rest of your evening. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank